Welcome to this short video from Altaro. My name is Paul Schnackenberg. This is an accompanying video to a blog post about retention policies and archiving mailboxes in Office 365. In this short video, we're going to look at creating a retention policy, creating and publishing a retention label, enabling online archiving, and enabling move to archive tag to move data from a primary mailbox into an archive mailbox. Read more about it in the article. We're going to start off with creating a retention policy. So I have started off by logging into a demo tenant here to the Office 365 Admin Center or the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. I then go down to the Compliance Center, and in here I go to the Information Governance area. And you'll find that not under data classification, which would be logical. That's why I'm showing you that could be one place you go for it. But it's actually under policies and under data retention. That will then bring up the information governance. We have 5 different tabs in here. We're going to spend a fair bit of time here today. I'm going to start off by creating a retention policy. So when you add a retention policy, you've got to give it a name. Now these are the Office 365 wide retention policies, and you'd want to use these today if you're getting started with these, not the individual ones that used to be in SharePoint and Exchange. These ones are more comprehensive and a better solution for most businesses. We give the policy a name and a description. We then need to define, are we going to retain content? We get a little help bubble show up. And we can say for how long we're going to retain it, or in the case where we actually do want to retain it forever, we can set it for days, months, or years. And then we can decide what happens when that retention period has expired. Do we want to delete the data? And then we have advanced options where we can look at particular words or phrases or sensitive content. Read more about sensitivity labels in the article, and you can include those in your retention policy. Next up, we pick our workloads. So I can pick specific locations here: Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Office 365 groups, Skype for Business, where you need to pick individual accounts, Exchange public folders. Now notice that if I pick anything Teams related, so Teams channel messages or Teams chats, I can't pick the other workloads, so you need separate policies for those. So we can add in the workloads we want here, and this same retention policy is going to span all of those different workloads. I can save this policy here as a sort of a starting template without actually creating it, and I can also create this policy here, which is what I'm going to do. So that sample policy is now in place. So next up, we're going to look at creating and publishing retention labels. So these are slightly different than retention policies. This is where you create a label on the retention label tab. Again, you got to give it a name, and you have a description for administrators, which they see here in the admin console, and a description for end users. These labels will be published to end users, and it's then up to them to apply it to the content in question, whether that's an email or a SharePoint document or a SharePoint library or a list or something like that, right? So you got to define these things for your label. And as you'll see on the next page here, in the next dialog box, are we going to use retention with this label? And in this case, of course, we are, because we're talking about retention labels. Now notice that these things are very similar to the settings we had for the retention policy. The difference, however, is we have one option here for trigger a disposition review, which you can't do with a policy, but you can do that with these labels. And you can then notify the people that after 5 years, certain people get an email to define whether this content that is labeled with this label should be disposed of or not. And I can also retain or delete the content based on when it was labeled rather than when it was created or when it was last modified. So that's another thing you can do with labels, but you can't do with retention policy. So now that I've created that label, it's now sitting on the labels here. I then need to publish that label, and this is where I pick where that label is going to go. So I need to choose to publish the label I'm going to publish. In this case, we're going to pick the Altaro retention label that we just created. I'm going to pick that one, and then I need to decide who this label is going to be, where it's going to go. So here again, I can choose all workloads or specific workloads. Maybe some of these labels are only applicable to the legal department, or maybe they're only applicable to certain people. This is where you would then put that in. And here you need to then create a policy based on your label. And that's the policy that's going to publish out these labels for your users to use manually to label content, as we cover in the article. Now, be aware that if you have E5 licensing, you can also use these labels to automatically apply to content based on searches or similar approaches. But that does require an E5. And auto-applying labels is here when you set this up, because this is an E5 tenant, and you can set these settings up here. And we're going to pick a label, again the same retention label, and we are going to pick that to apply to specific sensitive information, specific words or phrases, or the trainable classifiers. So these ones come from Microsoft, and you can actually create your own as well, but there's a bunch of built-in ones which we'll see here in a second, such as ones for offensive languages, resume, source code, profanity. In this case, we're going to pick profanity. So we can do different things with a policy based on these trainable classifiers as they look through content in the workloads in Office 365. So it's a nice little thing that may or may not apply from a regulatory or business policy point of view in your business. So that's auto-applying label, but remember, it requires E5 licensing. Okay, and that takes us over to the archive mailboxes. So we're going to look at enabling online archiving, and this is really the shortest demo on the planet because it's really simple. So what you need to do is you need to go back to the Information Governance tab. In this case, I'm picking the Altaro archive mailbox user. We can see that their archive mailbox is disabled. I hit the enable archive, and this user will now have an extra mailbox, which is their online archive mailbox. It takes a little bit of time to apply, and once that's in place, we now need a policy to automatically move data into that archive mailbox on a regular schedule. So to do this, we need a move to archive tag, which we create in Exchange. So we need the Exchange admin center, which we go back to the Microsoft 365 admin center, click on the Exchange console, and that takes us over to the Exchange admin center. The location we need is here under retention tags. So this is not a place you would use for any other retention tags or policies, because we can now use the unified ones. But for this particular one, to move data into an archive mailbox, we're going to create a new policy here. Notice that there is already one in here, a default move to archive after 2 years. But in this case, we're going to pick 4 years for this specific policy that we've got here. We're going to pick the action to move to archive, and we're going to set the number of days that has to pass before this happens automatically. Now remember that the archive mailbox is only available when the user is online in Outlook on the desktop. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope the article and the video has been useful, and please come back to Altaro for more great Office 365 content.